Craig Crawshaw of Oaks Bible Church, Santa Barbara, and want to share with you again in this fifth post about 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the great bodily resurrection chapter of the Bible. Now, last post we mentioned verses 3 and 4 of 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says of first importance was the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that, of course, is true, but I wanted to tell you this post of where that comes from partially is from the three first feasts of the Jews mentioned in Leviticus chapter 23. You know, the first feast that God commanded the Jews was the Feast of Passover. You might know that. The history, of course, is the Egyptians held the Israelites captive, and this is when Moses came to tell Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And finally, after the first 9 plagues, Moses said, "The last plague's going to do it." And it was the plague that was it was to kill the firstborn of each family as the angel of death passed through. Well, God wanted to protect the Israelites, his people, and so he had Moses tell them to put the blood of the lamb over the doorpost, sprinkle it over the doorpost, that they might be protected and the angel of death would pass over their home. And thus that first feast was Passover in memorial of that blood being shed by the Lamb to protect the people. Well, of course, Jesus, in AD of 33, we believe, died on that Friday of that week, and he, as the Lamb of God, shed his blood to protect his people. And so the first feast corresponds to Jesus' death. The second feast was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which corresponds to the burial of Jesus Christ. Why? Because the Feast of Unleavened Bread, again, back in the day of Moses and Pharaoh in Egypt, they ate that first meal at night that they were to leave Egypt in haste because the yeast was not put into the bread. It was made without yeast or without leaven, which is another word for yeast. It was made sinless. You know, yeast and sin are yeast is the metaphor for sin in the Bible, and so the bread was made in haste and without yeast. Jesus, when he went into the grave, went in sinless, without sin, without that yeast, and he went in haste. He died about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they had to quickly take him down from the cross to put him into that grave before sunset, the beginning of Sabbath. So just like the Feast of Unleavened Bread, that death of Jesus Christ is so critical because it corresponds to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the second feast of the Jews. And the third feast of the Jews, of course, is the Feast of First Fruits. We're going to be talking a whole lot more about that in 1 Corinthians 15, the feast that happened on the day after Sabbath, which would be on Sunday, the first day of the week when Jesus rose from the grave. Oh, there's so much more to tell you. Come on back for our other posts.